All right, welcome everyone. I'm Dr. Katie Rose, and this is our Regulate Your Nervous System and Tune into Intuition Fertility Masterclass. I am curious to know, for those of you who are on here live, if this is your first class with me, if this is your 12th class with me. As you know, if you've been here for a while, I always evolve the material based on what is coming up with my clients, what I'm seeing in practice. First class, just welcome. And so, my hope for you is that you will be able to take away something from this that you can implement in your daily life that will get you thinking differently and even shifting your identity into the most fertile identity for yourself. Got someone who's maybe second or third class. Awesome. Know that because our minds require repetition, and between 4 and 10 repetitions, it can take hearing the same thing in several different ways many times over before you have that, what we would call aha moment, right? So that's why I send out an email the night before just saying, hey, what would be your intention for this class? And if you have that ready and you want to drop that into the chat, you can direct it towards me if you don't necessarily want everyone seeing your intentions, but know that like we're all in this together. I'm rooting for you. Everyone in here is rooting for each other. And as I go through this class, and there will be some tools for regulating the nervous system, as well as some case studies. With the case studies, I invite you to look at these as what's possible. I know that it's often felt like, oh gosh, like this just happens for everyone around me. Like everyone around me is pregnant. It happens so easily for everyone else. Oh, great, it's their turn. It's never mine. And I can really appreciate how we get to that point. And I invite you to look at this as, oh, if it happened for them, it can happen for me. And if you're here and you're watching this, then I have a feeling you're ready for that. I've got someone preparing for their second round of embryo freezing. Oh, sending a lot of love to those developing follicles. I've got lots of clients who have been through the retrieval process in our brilliant fertility program. And these tools make such a difference when you are going through IVF. All right. I invite you to just turn off any distractions. As someone with late diagnosis of ADHD in life, I know it can be easy to be distracted by everything around you, but for the purpose of what we're learning here, I want you to close out any other tabs, put your do not disturb on so that you can really absorb all of this. If you're in the right place, if you've been trying to get pregnant for at least 3 months and you're feeling scared or frustrated that it hasn't happened yet, or maybe you even haven't even started trying because you have some fears that you're experiencing around what pregnancy might look like, what motherhood might look like. Maybe you've been told that your best chance is through IVF or donor eggs, and there's something about that that just doesn't quite feel right or like you're ready for yet. Maybe you've tried IUI or IVF and have been unsuccessful in getting pregnant, even. I have a lot of people who come into this world staying up way too late researching. So if that's you, you are also in the right place. So many people lose sleep over all of the questions that come up on the fertility journey. And I've got some questions about, what your experience with your primary care OBGYN REIs have looked like in supporting getting your questions answered later on. Maybe you're avoiding friends, family activities that you used to enjoy because there's that worry about getting triggered. And especially with Mother's Day coming up this weekend, this is a really important time to be aware of how you're feeling about things, how you can protect yourself, honor yourself. And if you don't like that that's how you've been feeling about things, how do you want to use these resources to start showing up differently? And maybe you have a fear that you're running out of time. That's such a common one in my practice. Chelsea, intention, beginning to trust and listen to myself instead of literally everyone else. Yes. Yes, yes, yes. We will definitely be getting more into the intuition part in the second section. But by hanging out with us today, you'll be learning like how to tell what's going on with your stress system. So, what's going on in your nervous system that might tell you you need support here. The relationship between the nervous system and your fertility, your reproductive health, the surprising things that contribute to nervous system dysregulation. And some of these you can just get started on easily today. And then what I call the four bodies that are involved in the conception process. So, spoiler alert, we have more than just our physical body that Western medicine focuses in on. This training is not a good fit for you if you are in a place where you just want to get pregnant at any cost without understanding what's going on in your body or what it's trying to communicate. I fully, wholeheartedly believe that our bodies are so wise. And I have been through a lot health wise, you guys. I have had many opportunities to hate my body and distrust my body. And to be able to come to this point and say, I trust what my body is communicating to me is a 180-degree turnaround. And I hope that I can help you get there too. If you're resistant to change, if you're resistant to growth, if you're resistant to deep healing, then this is not the place for you today. Or if you actually like the place of victimhood, if you're attached to the why me, why is it always me type of mentality, then you may not be ready for this. Or if you get upset when someone gives you 60 minutes of really good free content and then says, hey, this is how you can work with me at the end, because that is what I will talk about at the end of today. So, our first tool, we're going to go into something called the learning state. It's otherwise known as peripheral. Don't do this if you're driving right now, but if you're sitting anywhere safely in a non-moving vehicle, then I want you to go ahead and take a couple nice deep breaths. And you're going to shift your gaze up towards where the wall meets the ceiling. In my case, I'm really close to a window, so I'm going to look at like the top of the window. And you're going to put your arms in like cactus arms. See mine? And start to wiggle your fingers. You just keep your gaze on that point up where the wall meets the ceiling. You're not going to move your gaze at all. I just want you to notice that, like, you can kind of see in your peripheral, your fingers are wiggling. I want you to go ahead and start pulling your shoulder blades back, pulling your elbows back so that your fingers are almost like behind you now. And just notice your awareness of them still in your periphery. And go ahead and like bring your arms back so you see your fingers again. And then deep breath, extending them back behind you and just noticing it's like your awareness is expanding. Another deep breath. Go ahead and bring your arms down, bring your gaze back down to your screen. This is an exercise that almost immediately shifts into the parasympathetic state. So I was feeling pretty amped up before today because I was really excited to present on this. And even doing that exercise, like I can feel this physical shift of like, oh, okay, I'm starting to like settle back down into my body because I was like out here before. And we're going to be doing another really powerful exercise at the end, EFT tapping, for those of you who popped in a few minutes late. EFT, also known as emotional freedom technique, is an extremely powerful tool when used correctly for moving limiting beliefs, clearing negative emotion, reducing physical pain, in part because it regulates the nervous system, and pain is a central nervous system response. So this is one of my favorite tools for our fertility clients. I use this extensively in the Brilliant Fertility program, and I'm really excited to get to do this with you guys today. For those of you who are just meeting me for the first time, I'm Dr. Katie Rose. I'm a licensed naturopathic physician in Arizona, also a certified hypnosis and NLP practitioner. I got into the hypnosis and neurolinguistic programming world because I had patients who were physically doing everything they could to get pregnant, and things still weren't working. Their labs looked normal, even optimal, and things still weren't working. And I realized that we're missing a whole lot from the mental, emotional, and spiritual realm when it comes to fertility. So, several years ago, I started pulling more of that into my practice and using the EFT in the Brilliant Fertility Program. And then 2 years ago, started training in hypnosis therapy. And that has been a really expansive, valuable, supportive tool for my clients, because sometimes there's just that one sticky belief that we are carrying that we might not even be fully aware of, that is also keeping us in a state where it's hard to receive. We'll talk about the subconscious a little bit more later. All right, so my journey started, this is me in 2011. I was in medical school. I thought my stress was pretty under control for being a third year medical student. I was exercising really regularly. I was trying to prioritize my sleep. Like, I wasn't pulling all-nighters the way I was in undergrad studying. I thought I had a pretty good system in place, but something in my body really felt off. And in 2011, I decided to come off of hormonal birth control, which I'd been on for 8 years. And I just had this like intuition that like I needed to know what occurred in my body off of it. So I came off birth control. I didn't get a period for 6 months at a time. And the next year went to my OBGYN. It's like, I don't know. I think something's off. This doesn't feel normal. And she said, if you're not trying to get pregnant, like, what's the big deal? You're young, you've got plenty of time. And that didn't sit right with me. I was in a training program, all about how to practice holistically, and we're learning about the period as a fifth vital sign. And it was like, it doesn't seem like a vital sign that I'm not ovulating and therefore not getting a period. That didn't seem right to me at all. And I knew I wanted kids someday, even if I wasn't in a position to start trying at that moment. If it was up to me, I totally would have. Like, I wanted all the babies, but it wasn't, it wasn't a reasonable, rational, logical decision at that point. But I knew that I needed to get whatever was going on in my body essentially reorganized. And it had become a huge, almost irrational fear that I wouldn't be able to have children when I was ready to, because I knew I wasn't ovulating. And so far, no one had answers for me. So I was scared. And I started to lose sleep, and I started to research all the things at night, and I just wasn't getting answers. So I had to really learn how to fix my hormones myself. And that was initially kind of a tailspin of doing all the things, like taking all these designer supplements for hormone health. And um, oh gosh, in terms of like the diets that I did, keto and paleo and intermittent fasting, which we didn't realize how damaging to female reproductive hormones that was at the time. Like, there's a lot that I tried, and it took a lot of trial and error to figure out what my body needed. And in that process, I think my nervous system got pretty dysregulated, just doing all the things. So in the end, it ended up taking me about 3 years to get regular periods back. But I was eventually able to clear up my cystic acne that had developed when I came off the pill. Um, this is typo here, but I was experiencing ruptured ovarian cysts about every 2 to 3 months. Landed in the ER for those, and that was awful. And I never really knew when they were going to come on. And it would, put me out for a couple days. They were really terrible. So I went through a lot, and it was hard being dismissed by ER doctors, OBGYN, even some of the doctors that I was rotating with. I did finally find someone who was willing to run labs for me, which was really helpful at that time so that we could see like there were some things that weren't necessarily optimal in those labs. But everyone would look at me and say, well, look, you look healthy. And that was frustrating because I know a lot of you have experienced this with infertility. It's a silent condition. Like you can't look at someone and know that they are struggling with fertility. You can't just look at someone and know that they're ovulating. So that term is still rather triggering to me. Um, so I'm pretty happy to say that at this point, at 38 years old, I am more fertile than I was at 25. And I firmly believe that biological age is so much more important than chronological age. So your chronological age, that is, based on the day you were born. That's the number that's on your birth certificate. You can't argue that. And I know that there's a lot of fear around age and running out of time. But when it comes to age, our biological age is so much more important. And we have a lot of things that we can do to influence our fertility that Western medicine just, it's not part of their learning system. So we really can't hold it against them for not giving us these tools right off the bat. It's just not part of their system. And therefore, going into the reproductive endocrinologist's office and not coming out with a whole plan on your mitochondrial health and nervous system regulation, like I wouldn't expect that. So I think we have to have reasonable expectations for the various providers that you might encounter on this journey and know that for just about anything that's coming up, there is a resource and there's a person who can help you. And you know how to do it perfectly. That's, I hope, a relief to a lot of you that no matter what system you find to support you on this journey, you don't have to do it perfectly. These are my two little munchkins. It's hard to believe that they're getting so big. And just a quick disclaimer as we dive into this stuff, I'm not giving medical advice here. This is for educational purposes. So please discuss any changes with your medical team. All right, so another big deep breath as we begin to get into our nervous system portion of this. Just imagine that you might need to step out of your own way. This might take a new way of thinking, a relearning, if you will. And even taking one little action can make a big difference. A metaphor that I recently heard that I loved was the tiniest of hinges open the biggest of doors. So you may come away with something that you think is seemingly very small, but could make a huge impact for you on this journey. It could be the turning point. Perfection is the enemy here. So let's just start to release that right now. Any recovering perfectionists here in the chat? Just drop a 1 so I know how many of us there are. And fear can be a guide, but it's not the final say. So whatever fears are coming up for you, I think it's important to bring them into the light, to acknowledge them, to validate them, but not let that control your life and your decisions. I love that. I asked to drop a 1 and you have 8 ones. Yes. Okay. So we've got some recovering perfectionists here. All right. This is an introduction into the 4 bodies. So physical body. This is what Western medicine is mostly addressing, right? This is the anatomy, the physiology, the form, the function, the hormone responses, and the cell-to-cell communication. But as you can see, there's a lot more going on in this chart. So we've got the emotional body, the mental body, the spiritual body. And if we were to look at this almost as like, how does it relate to our person, our physical body? This is like, what we can touch. It has really clear boundaries. The mental body is believed to be, expanded a little bit outward from the physical body. The emotional body is a little bit bigger than that either. And so you think about like, if you've ever walked into a room when 2 people are in an argument and they have stopped talking the minute they realize someone's coming in, but you can feel the tension. Like you can sense that there is some sort of emotional occurrence happening. Like that's what we mean when we're like the emotional body. It's like out here. And then the spiritual, of course, this is like the most expansive body. So this is our connection to whatever it is that you feel connected to, God, source, universe, the collective, but also to yourself. And these are all interacting with each other. And when we have a disconnection in one area or disruption in one of these, outward bodies, then it will impact the other layers to the extent that something that's going on with the spiritual connection can cause a physical symptom. So for the people who have had that experience of being told all their labs are normal, all of their scans are normal, all of their imaging is normal, these are the people who we especially want to look outward and go, what is happening in the mental, emotional, and spiritual bodies? Okay, so let's dive in to the nervous system, hormone connection. This is like a rough diagram, but basically, our nervous system, our central nervous system, is the brain and the spinal cord. Our peripheral nervous system are all of the nerves that come off of the brainstem, cranial nerves, and all of the nerves that come off of the spinal cord. And eventually, these nerves, as they're secreting their, electrical signals are being transmitted from neuron to neuron, eventually a signal will land on a cell outside of the nervous system, and that will create a chemical response, sometimes a hormonal response if it is landing on an endocrine gland. And within our brain, the hypothalamus is like our master hormone creator. So the hypothalamus is creating gonadotropin releasing hormone. Gonadotropin releasing hormone communicates with the pituitary gland, which is what's secreting FSH and LH. You guys are probably already pretty familiar with these hormones if you've been on the fertility journey for a while. And then FSH and LH, these are what are communicating with the ovaries and the testes. And then the ovaries are putting out estrogen throughout the follicular phase, and then after ovulation, progesterone. And then these are communicating with the nervous system as well. So there are feedback loops between these organ systems. And what I want you to see here is just that everything is connected. We can't just look at the reproductive hormones in this vacuum, especially when the brain is the master hormone gland. And this is a little bit more of a complicated diagram of the neuroendocrine system. So neuro being, of course, the nervous system, endocrine being hormone system, and just showing like how all of these hormones are in constant communication with each other. So the brain, the gut, the liver, the ovaries, the testicles, these are all in communication with each other all the time. The pancreas and insulin. I don't expect you to memorize this. I just want to have an appreciation for why this is so important. Before I do our first case study, I'm curious to know, and you can just give me a yes, no. When you've been to your doctor's office, primary care, OB, reproductive endocrinologist, has there ever been a conversation about nervous system regulation? Just give me a yes or no. Yeah, no, I'm guessing no is going to be the most common answer. Absolutely not. Chelsea, I love your passion today. All right, so I'm going to go into our first case study. This is Erin, and at 36 years old, she was diagnosed with adenomyosis, Asherman syndrome, recurrent pregnancy loss. She had had a couple failed IVF cycles already. And when she had initially joined the Brilliant Fertility Program, her goal was to prepare for her next embryo transfer. She didn't feel ready for it yet because she was still in a place of like deep mistrust of her body and really just not feeling like herself. She had low energy, she had sluggish metabolism. She was really struggling to find healthy routines. Like she was someone who historically had liked to go walking and go to yoga, and um, she was struggling to even like eat regular meals at the point that we met. So it felt to her like there was almost like an insurmountable number of things that she would have to do. And I knew we were going to need to start really simply with her. And so with the Brilliant Fertility Program, because it's structured in such a way that you just get like little bits of information at a time, like that wasn't going to further overwhelm her from a nervous system standpoint. But what we really focused on was physically, because she was feeling so sluggish, she felt like I really want to do some kind of detox. And if you've been in my world for a while, you might know like I'm not a huge promoter of detox. From a medical standpoint, like our liver and our kidneys are constantly detoxifying. But what we do need to have a better understanding of is like the environmental toxic burden that we're exposed to. And when we've gone through procedures like IVF or hormonal stimulation, then that does put added burden on the liver. And we have to make sure that the drainage pathways are properly functioning to basically get rid of excess toxin exposure. So, we did do gentle detoxification to improve her hormone metabolism and her digestion and her energy. And emotionally, I gave her some resources to begin processing just what she had been through over the last few years. The grief from a pregnancy loss, the grief of things not having worked out the way that she had hoped, from the time that she had gotten married to the point she was now, was very far from her life plan. And there's a lot of emotion that comes up around that. The shame that she was feeling about essentially feeling like a failure, that she had failed her husband, that her body was failing her, and the lack of trust that she had in her body. And this didn't mean that she had to do a lot of quote unquote work. There were a few really powerful exercises that I guided her through to do on her own. And then, within our program would kind of hash out like what that meant to her, what she was feeling as she moved through it. And after 4 months, I got this text from her that she'd gotten a positive pregnancy test unassisted. And I say unassisted versus natural because I truly believe that all pregnancy is natural, and that even though IVF may be given a bad rap in like the hardcore natural influencer world, there's all different paths to get pregnant and all pregnancy is natural. But for her, this came as such a surprise because she'd already been through these IVF cycles. She'd been told her lining was too thin. She'd been told that she had actually been told that she should probably start looking at surrogacy because even some of her doctors didn't believe that she could carry a pregnancy. So, as she said in her message, this was the first month that she had felt true nervous system health, like real coming home moments. And here's her healthy baby boy who was born last year. And eventually we'll start thinking about what it might look like for baby number 2. So this sort of brings us to a point of asking, well, how do I know if my nervous system is dysregulated? There are several physical and emotional mental symptoms that we will kind of list out in just a moment. But there are 3 really supportive ways that we can assess this that don't involve having to run hundreds or thousands of dollars worth of tests. That can give you a really good idea of what is the state of your nervous system. So the first one is CO2, carbon dioxide tolerance. The next one is flexibility, so literally like your muscle flexibility. And the third is heart rate variability. We are going to specifically go into CO2 tolerance. We're actually going to do this test today for those of you who are on. And it's easy. All you need is your breath. So this is our second tool. I say, let's do this. So how to run this test. It's pretty insanely simple. The only tricky part I think is going to be figuring out how best to run the timer so you guys know what your result is, and then we'll talk about what the results mean. So we are first just going to start with breathing. Essentially, CO2, we think of carbon dioxide as being a bad thing often, but carbon dioxide tolerance is important because our lungs' ability to tolerate carbon dioxide gives us a much better idea and understanding of how resilient we are to stress. So having a higher CO2 tolerance helps reduce anxiety. It helps you manage symptoms of depression. It reduces inflammation. It increases energy. And from a performance standpoint, if we have any runners or swimmers or weight trainers in the group, it is really supportive of increasing your performance. So this is how we do it. Um, I'm going to be timing it on my end, and I'm just going to like give you like the 5-second increments so that when you are complete on your end, you can kind of note where you are in this. But I'll describe it first, then we'll do it together. So you're going to inhale and exhale normally 3 times through your nose. On the 4th inhale, you're going to hold at the top for just a moment. When you're ready to exhale, since we're all going to start at the same time, I'll just put my hand up when I want you to start your exhale. I'll start the timer, and you'll exhale as slowly as you can for as long as you can. Now, once you've run out of air, your time is up. If you accidentally hold your breath or swallow while exhaling, that's your time up right there. So you'll stop the timer, even if you feel like there's more air to come out. If you're like, oh, I can't do it. Does that make sense to everyone? And I'll guide you through it as we start as well. If you're watching the replay, just you can set a timer for yourself as well. All right. I'll be asking what everyone's result ends up being at the end. Okay, so let's just go ahead and start with the inhale and exhale normally 3 times through your nose. Go ahead and inhale. Second breath. Third breath. On this 4th inhale, breathe in as deep as you can, filling your lungs as much as you can. Pause and go ahead and start your exhale slow and as long as you can. We're at 5 seconds, 10 seconds, 15, 20, 25, 30, 35, 40, 45, 50. Anyone go beyond 50 seconds? If you know what your number was, just go ahead and drop it in the chat. Is it 15, 20, 25, 30? Awesome. 17, 15, 28, 20. Awesome. Thank you guys so much for participating. This is such an important test to be able to gauge, like, how are you actually responding to stress? Because stress is so normalized that sometimes we're like, I don't know, I feel fine, but we're just adapted to stress. So great. We've got a range from 15 to 28. And so, in terms of understanding the results, um, under 20 seconds is associated with higher intolerance of CO2 and therefore greater intolerance to stress and sensitivity to stress. And people with levels under 20 generally have more anxiety, more symptoms of inflammation, and more issues with like their pulmonary stamina too. It's not good or bad, guys. You know, it's just information. It's just a starting point of going like, oh, okay, I now see where I might need some support. 20 to 40 seconds is considered more average. So this is more of like the standard working American, like experiencing moderate to high stress or anxiety. There is room for improvement within this. And then anything above 40 is considered like more advanced, greater likelihood of stress tolerance, stress resilience, and tend to have better lung capacity and lung performance. The first time I did this test, because I wasn't aware of this, they don't teach this in medical school, which is frustrating. But as part of my hypnosis training program, in coming in contact with someone there who specializes in athletic performance. I did this, and I think it was also a 17, and have gradually worked my way up to like on some days, I can get like a 35, and it can change day to day. So, this is one of these experiments that you can do from time to time to just be like, how I'm checking in on myself. How am I doing today? How hard could I push myself? And be able to use that as a gauge for like, what's your resilience looking like? So, it's interesting, like everyone here was under 40, so lots of room for improvement. And one thing that you could start with to improve your CO2 tolerance is to go for a walk, starting with just 10 minutes, where you only breathe through your nose. So it's like a no talking walk. You can listen to whatever you want, but you're just breathing through your nose. That simple exercise can improve your stress resilience, your stress tolerance, and increase your nervous system resilience. Does everyone feel like they could take a nose breathing walk? All right. And here's some other potential symptoms of nervous system dysregulation, what I see in my practice frequently. So, chest tightness or heart palpitations, people who often like indicate like, oh, I feel everything like in here, or they feel it in their gut. So there's a lot of digestive issues like indigestion, bloating, irregular bowel movements, frequent illness, like you're the person who just catches everything. Any person who walks in with the slightest cold, like you happen to catch, fatigue, irregular menstrual cycles, painful periods. I absolutely find in my practice that if someone has had a really stressful period of time, their periods tend to be even more painful. Now, obviously, there's outliers of people with endometriosis, like they can be doing their darn bestest on the stress front, and there still is other things that we need to be doing to support them. But for the average non endometriosis patient, stress makes the biggest difference in painful periods. I also tend to see lower progesterone and shorter luteal phases in people who have a lot of nervous system dysregulation. And when it comes to metabolism, when we have more signaling from stress hormones, it sends the message in our body to store fat. So we tend to see more metabolic dysregulation, more weight accumulation around the middle, difficulty with losing weight despite quote unquote doing all the right things, or even for some, they're the more rare ones, but difficulty keeping weight on is possible too. And then, of course, unexplained infertility. It's hard to know in that situation, like what was the egg, what was the chicken, since infertility in and of itself creates so much stress. And then what are some emotional symptoms? So feeling really irritable, feeling on edge frequently, been getting startled easily. So like someone comes around the corner and like you knew they were in the house, but it still scares the shit out of you. Feeling overwhelmed, feeling like it just is impossible to accomplish a task. What I do find in my practice is that sometimes even what for some people might think is like the simplest task of calling your doctor's office feels like, oh my God, it's insurmountable. And I don't want you to beat yourself up about this. Okay. The simplest things can feel so overwhelming when we are in this state of functional freeze, and you're not alone. Insomnia, so that type of insomnia where like you're tired, but you lay down and you would have thought that you could fall asleep immediately, and then your brain just won't shut the hell up. Feeling frequently triggered. So this is a common experience for people who've been on this journey for a while where, they get something in the mail and it just, they get the birth announcement, they get the baby shower invite, and it's just enough to like send them over the edge. And so what I find in my practice is that when we can acknowledge those triggers and look at them as this is not something wrong with me, but this is a way of my body communicating like, hey, here's an area where we could use some healing around, then we can usually start to reduce those triggers over time, getting to a point of neutrality. Um, Having hyper awareness. So this is funny, and this will tie into intuition as well. When you have that state where you're like, I just notice like everything that's happening in my body all the time. And people will say to me, I'm so in tune with my body. And then I ask, well, what does that mean to you? And they say, well, like, I can feel this happening and I can feel that happening. And so it's kind of interesting because it begs the question of like, well, are you hyper aware of everything that's happening because again like your nervous system is so on edge versus being highly in tune with your body, which um, is where I'm going to go a little woo woo, like from the energetic vibrational standpoint, like that's a much more settled vibration. In tune to me feels like being more in trust, more in communication with your body versus hyper awareness is like hyper vigilance. And the thought patterns that you might see with the two will be different. So the hyper vigilance will be like, what was that twinge? Like, is there something wrong with me? Versus in tune to be like, oh, I felt a little twinge there. I think I might be ovulating. Like, oh, good job, body. Good job for ovulating. So I just want you to kind of be aware of some of the subtle differences that can happen there. We also see a lot of obsessive thinking, obsession over cycle charts, ovulation prediction tests, doing things perfectly, or it can flip to that state of overwhelm, functional freeze, where you're like, I can't even chart my cycle. I can't even think about where I am in my cycle right now. I'm just so burnt out. And just like the general cyclical roller coaster of all of it. And we're more likely to see numbing behaviors. So, if you get out of the shower and you find yourself, instead of being able to like continue the process of getting ready, you're like, I'm going to flop on my bed and scroll for 45 minutes before I can do anything else. Uh, even, I hate to say it, guys, even meditation and even hypnosis can be numbing behaviors because it feels good in the moment. But if you come out of it and you're like, well, I feel like shit 20 minutes later, like that's a sign that we're not quite getting to what you need as an individual. So, whatever the resource is that we use, it really needs to match where is this individual's level of nervous system activation right now. So, some sneaky causes of nervous system dysregulation. I've switched it up from our last one. So, if this is your second of this masterclass with me, you'll notice some differences here because there's lots of sneaky causes. But I really wanted to give you guys things that you can start to acknowledge today and make shifts with today. So, this is probably the one that surprises people the most is synthetic fragrance and environmental exposures. The reason synthetic fragrance is a nervous system disruptor is because it is highly activating to the nervous system. I think our olfactory nerve, the nerve that translates a smell to what our brain acknowledges, is what's carrying this information. So that's one way in which it can be triggering to the nervous system. These synthetic fragrances are also processed by our liver, and the chemicals that are in them are endocrine disruptors. So there's actually three different ways in which synthetic fragrance can cause nervous system dysregulation. So this is something that you could potentially start eliminating today if you chose to. Skipping meals and under eating. These are awful for our hormones. And I think this was one of my main culprits for my hormone dysregulation back in the day. Uh, we were still coming out of this culture of like low fat and emerging into like, oh, the paleo and low carb. And there's no such thing as one perfect diet, but we do need to make sure that you are getting enough nutrients, so a nutrient dense diet, and enough calories for your body to feel safe. So, skipping meals and under eating is a big culprit to a body that feels stressed out. Poor quality sleep. So, even if you're in bed for 8 hours, if you're waking frequently, if you're having really restless dreams, if you're breathing with your mouth open, or your partner reports that you're snoring, all of these could be disrupting your quality of sleep. And this is where heart rate variability can be a really good insight into how is your sleep potentially impacting your nervous system. So if you wear an Apple Watch, a Fitbit, there's so many newer trackers these days that tell you what your heart rate variability is. This can be a really fascinating piece of information. Again, I don't obsess over it, but it can be insightful. Lack of trust in your body, lack of trust in yourself. This causes so much second guessing. It's such an energy leak. And this is the area where I find like most commonly, no matter what someone's diagnosis is, this is such a common thread in my practice. So know that you're not alone if you're feeling that lack of trust in yourself. This is one of the things that we can use tapping to work on, and also acknowledge like what is going well in your body. Like you're breathing without you having to think about it. Your heart is beating without you having to send specific instructions. So finding the little things that you can find trust in can be really powerful. All right, here's some others. Masking. This can be such a sneaky one for people who are going through infertility. They're having to, get up at the crack of dawn to go to the fertility clinic 3 times a week for their blood draw, their monitoring scan, and then they have to go into work and just pretend everything is fine. That gets exhausting. Now, some people are able to turn it on and turn it off more easily than others, but it's a really common experience in my practice that people are like, God, it's just so hard, like going in and having to pretend that like I'm okay with all of this. Suppressed emotions and trauma. So this is sort of like this iceberg would be like, this white part is our conscious. This is the 10% that we are aware of. The blue part is the unconscious. This is that 90% of like how we were raised, how we are conditioned, the messages that we received from 0 to 7 years old that really develop our identity. This is what drives so much of our habits. And if there's incongruence between the conscious and the subconscious, if we've suppressed, um, then that creates more dysregulation as well. And then affirmations that don't actually feel true. Have you guys ever used an affirmation and like it sounds good in theory, but then there's that part of you like that's bullshit and that doesn't feel true and it makes me feel worse inside? Well, let me know if you've ever had that experience, because that is a version of incongruence, right? It's like self gaslighting. And I see a lot of the like holistic fertility coaches like posting affirmations and sharing affirmations. And I know that they're like everyone has a good purpose in doing this. But when we're not trained in understanding how the subconscious works, we can actually be creating a longer path. I feel like that's true with most affirmations in general, Chelsea. Yeah, it's yeah, they can feel really like, I don't know how to describe them, but I think we all know what the feeling is, right? And that'll be our next exercise is like, how do we turn an affirmation into something that's actually useful? And then the last one that I have listed here is like that lack of connection to your own intuition. So when we are reaching outside of ourselves for every answer and we're not able to trust ourselves, this really goes back to self trust. But we're not born with this manual on how to tune into our intuition, how to trust the guidance of our intuition, because those are two different things, too, right? It's like you might feel it and you're like, God, I'm getting this intuitive sense that I should be doing this. But logically, that makes no sense. So I'm going to do this other thing anyway. So there's the difference between like, do you feel it? Do you know what it sounds like? And are you listening to it? Do you trust yourself enough to listen to it? Do you trust the universe to help you on that path as well? And I feel like the ultimate nervous system dysregulation for my particular patient population is this whole roller coaster of infertility and within the menstrual cycle, just feeling like there's such highs and lows that your period starts and you might have been feeling really hopeful ahead of time. And then it's like, well, why am I doing any of this? Why do I take the supplements? Why do I try to eat well? Like, just fucking put me in bed with a pan of brownies and a bottle of wine because I'm done. And then as your period ends, and you're like, okay, well, you know what? It looks like I'm going to ovulate. Like maybe this is the cycle. Like I'm starting to feel hopeful again. Like, all right, let's do this. And then you have this crazy 2 week wait where that's when like the hypervigilance can often set in of like, oh, what was that? Is that implantation happening? Why are my boobs sore? Is that pimple part of PMS? And that was like the meanest thing in the world is that whatever created all of this decided that PMS should look similar to early pregnancy symptoms. So that 2 week wait is just such a common experience of feeling all over the place. And and then the cycle continues when you don't have resources to find more neutrality in it, find more outside of that particular part of your life that can bring you purpose and meaning and joy too. So let's talk about affirmation. Oh, we have another typo, but we're going to let go of our perfectionism. So, affirmation optimization. So, will be our third tool. This is for anyone who has just felt that like ick factor with affirmations, but they're like, there's got to be something that really helps. So, with common example of an affirmation that I see like thrown around on like social media is like, I am fertile and I completely trust my body to get pregnant and stay pregnant. And if that doesn't feel 100% true for you, then putting that on your mirror and looking at it every single day can just highlight that gap from where you are to where you want to be in a really painful way. But there is a way to make affirmations more powerful and actually help them kind of cross that conscious to subconscious wedge that we all have. And the more educated you are, the more intelligent you are, the thicker your analytical wedge will be. So the harder those skimpy affirmations can be. But when we can tack on things like, I am learning to, this can actually help it start to cross that barrier. So when you say, I am learning to trust myself, I am learning to trust my body, I am learning to be a person who believes they are fertile. That creates this opening for your conscious and unconscious to go like, okay, we might be able to get on the same page here. So I invite you to test that out and just even say it to yourself right now. I'm a person who is learning to believe that I am fertile. Let me know how that feels compared to I am fertile. Super helpful. Awesome. I'm glad it feels better. Glad it lands better. Yeah. Good. I'm glad that feels more genuine, Jess. This kind of leads us into part two because our intuition is really smart and our bodies are really smart. And a lot of our intuition lives in our bodily sensations. And I very much believe that because our bodies are so wise, they're always trying to communicate with us. So even when we're having weird, unexplained physical signs and symptoms, if we can get into a state of nervous system regulation that allows us to tap into our intuition, we can access that communication with our body. And yeah, saying I am fertile when all other cycles have not been successful feels fake. Oh, for sure. It's like completely just not acknowledging your lived experience so far. And that's my kind of irk with affirmations. So yeah, when you try something on, and this is like a whole nother conversation that I have a lot in the beginning of like the Brilliant Fertility program when people are really just introduced to this stuff for the first time. Um, the one thing that I appreciate about affirmations is that it does highlight our limiting beliefs. And when we can bring those out of the shadows, now we've got some other good, juicy stuff to work with. All right, coming to intuition. Intuition is like our ability to acquire knowledge without needing rational explanation, right? It's that sense, that gut feeling, that knowing. But everyone is going to have a different way of accessing their intuition. And this is where, like, when I initially meet a client or I'm talking to someone about becoming a client, I will often ask questions related to how they relate to their intuition. So, for anyone on, like, if you know what that feels like to you, like, do you feel it in your gut? Do you get, you know, just this like instant hit of knowing? Do you hear a voice in your head that's always like the higher wisdom version of yourself? Because everyone's going to have a different experience with intuition. So for someone to say like, oh, just trust your gut, it's like, well, that doesn't always mean the same thing for everyone. And I actually use human design in my practice to better understand how someone makes decisions and how they feel into their intuition. And that has helped me immensely because everyone has their own way of coming to that decision. And sometimes it takes people longer. Sometimes your inner knowing will be instantaneous, and your partner's inner knowing will take a full month for it to really land like, yep, this is what I'm supposed to do. So just give yourself lots of grace in exploring this intuition part. Well, what would be some signs and symptoms that you're experiencing some disconnection from your intuition? Lack of trust in yourself. Like if you're always second guessing your own decisions, that's a big sign to me. If you don't trust your body, if you're saying things to yourself like my body is broken, or literally like I just don't trust my body to be able to do this, that's like, okay, that's number one. Before we start obsessing about what someone is eating or taking all these supplements, like that's number one that we start with. Because if you don't believe that something's possible for you, if you don't believe that your body is capable of something, then anything else we do is just going to be essentially wasting resources. You're not trusting the timing of the universe. That one can be a little bit more challenging, right? Because it also involves like a connection to something outside of ourselves. Religion aside, it's like whatever that is that you trust is supporting you, and knowing that fertility is a spiritual process. Like we are bringing another soul, another human being into the world. So we are going to need to be willing to work on our own junk, clear that out of the way for this new soul to come in. We talked about this one, the hyper awareness of all the twinges in the body, the looking at the advice from all of the other sources. And even, I'm sure you guys have experienced this, sources that start to contradict themselves. So you go to one doctor's blog post and it says to do this, and then you go to like this functional health practitioner and it says to do this, and you're like, I don't know which one, I don't know which one to do now. Is there a way to do both? Like, it just creates so much inner turmoil. Um, the thought spirals. So what I realized for me is that when I really started to narrow in on what supported me with nervous system regulation and connection to intuition, is I actually stopped having those types of thought spirals that were like, what if this happens, and what if that happens, and if that happens, then this is going to happen, and then it all leads to like being alone, failure, and death. And I mean, those used to get pretty dark. And I know that, having talked to hundreds and hundreds of patients, that like, you guys aren't alone in having crazy thought spirals. But it's just a sign that like, oh, I need to be implementing some resources to reconnect to myself and whatever higher power I can rely on. Needing to get lots of opinions. Now, I have asterisks next to this because sometimes it is in your highest service to find doctors who believe in you. So if you've gone to someone and they just immediately jumped on the you need to just look at donor eggs, and there's this like whoa within you that was like, that doesn't feel right to me. I don't feel like we've turned over every stone we can turn. Well, heck yeah, go get a different opinion. And it might mean that you doctor shop until you find someone who's like, listen, I'm not sure why you haven't experienced success yet, but I'm going to look with you and we'll partner together. And I believe that we can turn over more stones and get to the root of this together. And I believe there's a lot of possibilities, even though we don't know what it's going to look like yet. Like, you may have to shop around for that person. Gut health issues. So, because so many people do have that intuition seat in their gut, when we've had a long experience of not following the intuition, not listening to the intuition, there will often be physical symptoms associated with that. I am one of these people. If I am not listening to it and following it, I will get physical gut symptoms, and it is not pretty. Sorry for the TMI. Sometimes when we also feel like problems just keep getting bigger and bigger. So the example of this is like, first God drops a pebble in the path. And then you're like, no, whatever, it's a pebble. I'm just gonna walk around that. Didn't even notice the pebble. And then it's a rock. And you're like, well, that's annoying. I have to step bigger over that. But it's not that big of a problem, right? You can still get over that rock. And then it's a boulder, because God's like, you weren't paying attention the first time. Like, you weren't listening the first time. So I had to make the rock bigger and bigger and bigger until it was so big that it stopped you in your tracks and you were forced to listen. And I don't want it to have to get that big for you. I want you to be able to tune in such a way that before something becomes a bigger problem, you know what you need to follow for yourself. And then number 8, the definition of insanity: repeatedly doing the same things and getting the same results, repeatedly doing the same things and expecting different results. I've had an experience with several people going through IVF who've been seeing, the same doctor for several IVF cycles. And I'm like, well, what have you changed from like the first retrieval to the second retrieval, or from the first transfer to the fourth transfer? And they're like, oh, we just do the same thing every time. And it just is like biggest face palm. Like, well, if nothing changes, then nothing changes. So we often have to do something differently if we want a different result. And a big question I get about intuition is like, what's the difference between my fear voice and my intuition voice? Uh, and that's going to be different for every person too. So after I get to know people, I'm usually able to help guide them through that on an individual level. But I wanted to give you guys a case study. I haven't presented this one before formally, so I'm pretty excited to. This person came to me before joining the Brilliant Fertility Program at 44 years old. She'd had a stillbirth and 3 subsequent miscarriages. Her labs looked normal in terms of there was no autoimmune, no clotting, no thyroid issues, no hormonal cause that we could see that would have caused miscarriages. She did have some nutrient deficiencies detected when we went a little bit deeper with her labs. Her AMH was 0.17. I don't use AMH as an indicator of whether someone can get or stay pregnant, especially at 44 years old. It's like, well, yeah, it's going to be lower. Her FSH was 13.3. I found that to be a pretty encouraging number given her age, but she had a lot of fears. Or I would almost say them fears. She had a lot of questions that I interpreted as fear. Am I too old? Am I too overweight? Can I afford this? Am I crazy for even trying? Because of her age and because of how she'd been counseled by reproductive endocrinologists in town, she was scared of having a baby that maybe had a genetic or congenital defect, and would that be her fault? And those are all valid questions. So, what we wanted to focus on with her was things that were in her control. So, things like taking charge of her finances, taking charge of her nutrition, not in an obsessive way, but teaching her what it would feel like for her body to be really nourished. What would that look like and feel like to her in a way that didn't feel like she was obsessing? Because she was someone who had uh, just bounced around from like different diets and detoxes, in part because she was concerned about her weight. We focused on establishing resources for acknowledging and moving through fear. So, using EFT tapping was a big one for her. She ended up loving doing like Abraham and Esther Hicks meditations. So, there were some things that she found on her own that like I don't often use in my practice. And this all helped her deepen her connection to her intuition and her trust in her body. So after 9 months, after playing with what her intuition felt like, what felt good in her body, she began just eating in a way that felt good and nourishing to her instead of doing these like extremes from one way to the other, like an extreme of paleo, an extreme of um, juicing. Those were all things that she had been doing ahead of time. Practicing body acceptance. So, not necessarily expecting her to go from a state of feeling really discouraged about where her body was weight wise to a, oh my God, I love my body. Because, we know how we feel about affirmations, but just really learning to appreciate the parts that were working well and get to a state of neutrality and then acceptance. Having more trust in the timeline, those tools for EFT and the specific meditations that she found for her were really helpful. And then while she was teaching dance full time, she ended up getting her real estate license. So she went from a place of starting with working with me, of being in debt and borrowing money from her parents, to what she was really excited about, a fat savings account for the first time in her life. So she was creating all of the necessary pieces of safety in mind, in body, in her bank account, and what she felt would be helpful for her in life in general, but was also helping her make room for the potential of having a baby still. And at the 1 year mark, I got a text from her. Uh, I'm sorry to text on your personal phone, but I can't stand it. I'm pregnant. And we were just about to start hypnosis because she had identified like a couple other limiting beliefs that she wanted to work through. And we ended up using her hypnosis sessions around just being able to create trust in this pregnancy, be able to connect to her baby's spirit. And that was her healthy baby born on January 31st of this year. So I love this story because by the time she conceived, she was 45. And by the time Sylvie was born, she was 47 or 46. Yeah, that maths. So she conceived at 45, she gave birth at 46. And I know that age is something that hangs so many people up, and it's a worthwhile question to discuss. But again, our chronological age is something we don't have control over. So worrying about it, stressing about it just isn't in our best, highest interest. Whereas biological age, we have some influence over. Like there are documented research protocols that we can use to extend our telomere length and improve our mitochondrial function. And these are things that can improve egg quality and pregnancy outcomes. So there is very much this science meets soul thing happening here. So this leads me to like that kind of vicious cycle that can occur when we have fearful thoughts. So the difference between a fearful thought and an intuitive thought might lead to a different physiological outcome. So with a fearful thought, something like, what if my body is broken? What if this isn't meant for me? What if I'm too old? This can often lead to overthinking, anxiety, insomnia. And we'll see some behavior changes along with this. So things like Googling at all hours, taking advice from 15 different sources, obsessing over doing everything right. And then we see a change in our stress hormone output. And the change in those stress hormones changes how things occur on an anatomical and physiological level. So we will burn through more of our nutrients, we'll use up more minerals, we'll use up more B vitamins, we'll have more oxidative stress. It changes how the blood flow occurs in the body. So when we have higher stress hormone concentrations, we see less blood flow going to the gut and less blood flow going to the reproductive system. So it's harder to absorb our nutrients as effectively, and we get less blood flow going to the ovaries and the uterus. And then that can delay the time to pregnancy further. And then we're like, well, shoot, now I'm not getting pregnant when I thought I should. This isn't working. And then it just perpetuates the fear response. So we've got to find places to break this cycle. And this is where people often will get led to going to see a reproductive endocrinologist. And what does that treatment look like in the Western world? So I want to pause and ask some questions first. When you walk out of your primary care, your OBGYN, your reproductive endocrinologist office, do you always feel like you have all of your questions answered? And you can just take a moment to put a Y for yes or an N for no in. No, always feel brushed off. Yeah, I'm sorry that is the common experience. I've been there myself. And when you walk out of your OBGYN or RE's office, do you feel like you have a plan that is customized to you as an individual? Or do you feel like you're just a number, you're getting some cookie cutter protocol that everyone with unexplained infertility gets? And when you walk out of their office, do you feel calm, at ease, and confident in the path forward? And on the off chance that you do walk out feeling calm, how long does that feeling last? I ask that piece, that really important last question, because I often find that with practitioners who are extremely confident in themselves and extremely confident in their treatment protocol, they can often transfer that sense of confidence to you, even if it's not intuitively the right treatment for you. Therefore, we will have situations where people leave feeling calm and they go home and they sleep on it and they wake up and they're like, no, wait a second, something's off. And then they almost feel like, I almost want to say like they're getting hypnotized in the doctor's office. They just didn't realize they were getting hypnotized. Um, but yeah, it sounds like for the most part, no one in the chat is feeling calm as they're leaving. And that breaks my heart because my belief, my experience in having done this for 10 years and working with probably thousands of fertility patients, um, hundreds and hundreds of pregnancies at this point, didn't start tracking until a few years ago. But my experience has been that when we create safety in the mind and the body, this is what opens up the path to pregnancy. So if we don't even feel completely safe in our doctor's offices, we've got a problem. And part of it is, learning how to step back into your power so that you get to a point where like you are so strong within yourself, you know how to regulate your nervous system so effectively and tune into your own intuition and trust yourself so deeply that you walk into any office and you're like, they can't rock me. Like nothing can get to me. Like that is the state that I want to help more people get to, because that's empowerment. Yeah. And I mean, in general, it's the trauma that so many people go through as a result of infertility, repeated scans. It's such an invasive process that we really need more tools to support people mentally, emotionally, and spiritually through that. Right. And like, how do most of these offices treat fertility? Right. It's like, it kind of seems like no matter what someone's walking in with, the eventual treatment is IUI. And then if that doesn't work after like 3 to 6 tries, then it's right on to IVF. So, with the exception of tubal issues, IVF doesn't treat the underlying causes. That's what this slide says. Yeah, it feels like this work is essential for being able to deal with the medical fear mongering that goes on when you actually do get pregnant. Bingo. Yes. Uh, that's a huge piece of it. And then on into parenthood as well, Chelsea, because and this is something that like even though I was working in the fertility world 8 years ago, when my first son was born, I didn't necessarily have all of like the nervous system regulating tools. I wasn't doing hypnosis or neurolinguistic programming at that point, and he was born early. There were several things that like during his like labor and delivery that now looking back with the tools I have, I'm like, man, I could have advocated for myself differently. So these are all really helpful tools for the fertility process, but these are also going to be helpful for many other moments in your life as pregnant people, as parents, as partners, as employees, as bosses. Like these are tools that will actually support you through most of the hard things that might occur. Moving forward towards being a single mother by choice, there's not a lot of support for that path in these contexts. Yeah, my mother was a single mother by choice. So I do understand that journey from the child's standpoint and having had those discussions with her. And I've had, maybe probably only a dozen patients over 10 years who were in that camp. So you're right, there's not a lot of individualized support for that in the Western medical community. So I do find that our single mother by choice moms require a better community for that. So my concern about IUI and IVF is that it may be forcing a pregnancy on a body that's trying to communicate, I'm not ready. And this won't be true for everyone. I mean, I have, same-sex couples and the single mothers by choice who like there's probably physically nothing that we need to be hyper focused on, but it's still a physically, emotionally, financially demanding process to go through these treatments that often need to be supported better. And in general, like with the standard American diet, with the environmental concerns that people, you know, in our generation have had exposures to, there's still more physically that I wish was being talked about in the preconception window and preparing for IVF to improve outcomes in anyone. So that's really what the principles of the Brilliant Fertility Program focus on, is like the 3 months leading up to a pregnancy, whether someone is trying to conceive unassisted or through IUI or IVF, is, well, what are the physical, mental, emotional, spiritual systems that we can be using to support this and having the healthiest pregnancy possible? Yes. So, okay, this leads me to, what are the root causes? Like, let's see if there's other issues that need to be addressed before we jump into IUI or IVF. There's a lot. It's rarely just one thing, but what I see in my practice is a combination of hormonal imbalances, nutrient deficiencies, inflammation, thyroid issues that are often subclinical. We cannot rely on TSH alone. That could be its whole separate masterclass just on thyroid. Autoimmune issues, microbiome issues, environmental exposures, and chronic stress. And so, if we haven't looked at these, why are we jumping to this treatment that doesn't actually address these? We can force an egg and sperm together, but if we're not addressing these, then are we having the healthiest pregnancy possible? And what is one factor that is connected to all of these is the nervous system. And that is, again, why I start there. So I want to talk about another case. So this is a 38-year-old woman who'd come to me with a history of adenomyosis, which is like the cousin of endometriosis. It's where there's endometrial tissue or endometriosis like tissue within the muscular wall of the uterus. She'd had significant post COVID syndrome where she had chest pain, difficulty breathing, and she also had recurrent bacterial vaginosis and one prior miscarriage. So when she had gone to her OB, they said, well, you've got to wait for 6 months. You've got to try for 6 months before we do any further testing or treatments. This is a person who's highly proactive and works in like metabolic health. She's an extremely knowledgeable researcher. And she was like, nah, I don't like that answer. How can we be proactive about this? Like, I want to have the healthiest pregnancy possible, not just wait around on my rump for 6 months. So we did some additional testing to understand inflammation, mitochondrial function, and the microbiome, because she'd had this history of COVID as well, which does create some interesting effects with inflammation in the mitochondria and the immune system. And her lab results revealed that she did have infections associated with miscarriage risk and the need for more mitochondrial and antioxidant support. So we could know how to be targeted with supplements instead of just her reading it starts with the egg and taking 20 different things. Said, okay, based on your lab results and your history, like these are the things that we could use that would make a difference. So we used antibiotic type herbs, specific probiotic strains to support what we saw in her microbiome testing, emotional support for processing grief. She used the tapping sequences in the Brilliant Fertility Program. The fears that were coming up around having a future pregnancy were pretty high for her. So we spent a lot of time focusing on that. And then some specifics for the mitochondrial support as well. And within a month, she had increased energy. She had relief from the vaginal symptoms that she'd been experiencing. She had the most obvious egg white cervical fluid that she could recall having at ovulation. She felt more in tune with her body and that whole fear voice versus intuition voice. 1 month later, she got her positive pregnancy test and she had a healthy baby boy born in October. And I highlight that case because she is someone, had she just relied on her OBGYN to wait 6 months and then go to the REI, she would have probably had her FSH, LH, estradiol, prolactin, a TSH screening, probably the sexually transmitted infections, blood type, AMH, and they would have left it at that. I have very rarely seen extensive testing done from a reproductive endocrinologist. And again, we can't really knock them for that. It wasn't part of their training. So we have to go in with reasonable expectations. But had we not pushed harder to have these tests, we wouldn't have had those answers for her. And had she not listened to her intuition on, no, it's time to be proactive, it would have been different. There's also some imaging that's often done, hysterosalpingogram to make sure the tubes are open, an ultrasound to check the structure of the uterus. Sometimes, if we're lucky, we'll get a semen analysis before someone starts IUI. But I had a case recently where someone had been trying to get pregnant for 6 years and no one had ever recommended they get a semen analysis. And I just about fell off my chair. So the sooner the better, you guys, on getting a semen analysis. That is 50% of the DNA. Again, that could be an entire other training, and they are very important. But we need to understand that normal doesn't mean optimal with labs, and we have to look at the whole person. We need more context with labs, and that the labs are just one part of the picture. So we have to address these other factors. I hope I have beat that dead horse properly. Okay, my last case that I'm going to go through today. This is a 29-year-old. She'd been trying to conceive since she got married at 23, so 6 years, and had been diagnosed with unexplained infertility, low AMH. She had irregular cycles. She was told that she had a less than 2% chance of conceiving on her own and that she should pursue donor eggs. I don't want to spoil it too early, but she did get pregnant. And based on her history and how her cycle chart appeared, I was able to help her advocate for getting additional testing done. Some of it she had to do herself, like based on what we were seeing and the research that I share in the Brilliant Fertility Program. She was able to decide, like, this is the test I need to run, and there's some self-order labs that you can do that through. But based on those, we were able to figure out that she had a lot of inflammation and she had some past infections that her body was trying to fight. So here's what her cycle chart looked like initially. This was 3 years ago, and it was all over the place, spotting all over the place, late ovulation. And after 4 months, she had a really nice clear ovulation on cycle day 14. She ended up conceiving this cycle, and right now she's working on baby number 2. So I, again, want you to, or invite you to see these as possibilities. If things haven't been going well, if it feels like no one's listening, if it feels like your body is trying to communicate something and you're just not sure what it is yet. And in terms of what other specific tests to advocate for, that's extremely challenging to know without getting to know someone's history better. I do have a lab guide download I can send out in the follow-up to this masterclass that is like, this is my more extensive blood test that I'm doing. But if someone has symptoms of like recurrent vaginal infections, yeast infections, endometriosis, like there's additional microbiome testing that can be done either via swab or even period blood collection. But that's something that I really work with people on a case-to-case basis. So if you're already feeling like pulled towards this work, I'm going to put in the chat the option to set up a discovery call with me. So I invite everyone to consider that if you're feeling like, okay, this is speaking to me and I want to know where I can go from here. I just put the discovery call link in the chat for you guys. So, yeah, in this client's case, yes, we focused in on the inflammation. One thing that was really cool to highlight with her was that she came in feeling pretty defeated, being 29 years old, being told she should pursue donor eggs. But by the end of the program, and when we did her feedback call during her pregnancy, she was like, you know what? By the end, I was just saying to myself, like, why not me? Like, that's why I'm here, right? Like, I can defy the odds. Why not? And so her thought process was changing. And that was pretty cool to witness and know that this was impacting her on that mental and emotional level as well. Okay, so this leads me to what is the framework that I use in my practice? And having it's hard to just like articulate all of it in one, what are we at, 90-minute session here, but it starts with uncovering the root cause, right? Doing personalized assessment. And I do this with my one-to-one members, and I also do this with the Brilliant Fertility Program members because it is a smaller group program. And it's possible to do that when you are able to get a really good quality assessment going, that people are filling out the right questions. If we're asking the right quality questions, then we know, like, how do we need to order the right tests, which tests do we need to do, what systems of the body do we need to focus on, knowing that it's all connected. In the meantime, while we're waiting for all that information, we're working on the nervous system, right? So kind of coined this the reproductive safety arc. So we're looking at what do we need to create safety in the physical, mental, emotional, and spiritual bodies. Because when one or more system is out of balance or ignored, that's where we end up with more stress, more mistrust, more dysfunction. And when we create safety, this is where we have this opportunity to synchronize all of these systems. So when we look at how do we support the hormones, get better nutrition, support detoxification, when we become the gentle observer of your self-talk, we validate all your feelings, when you learn how to shift into neutral, access your intuition, your trust, your inner power and higher power, this is where we create that safety. And safety leads to receptivity. So I also want you to begin looking at this as an opportunity not to be doing, and just like adding this to your checklist of things that you can do to improve your fertility, but looking at this as an opportunity to shift your way of being, to shift into a state where your identity is more receptive. The being is just as important, if not more so, than the doing here. And the last piece of this framework is embodiment and implementation. I have a feeling most of you know what you need to be doing, or you're already doing all of it. You've done all the things. Right? And then it becomes overwhelming because you're like, well, what do I actually implement? What's right for me? How do I embody this fertile identity? What the hell does embodiment even mean? This is like the who you be, right? So without the integration and the practices that bring you into an alignment, things tend to stay stuck. So those old patterns of like the roller coaster, just kind of checking off the supplements in all the books, scrolling Google till your eyes bleed, IVF without identifying root causes, which I feel like should just be criminalized, DIYing everything. This is something that for whatever reason, so many people feel like they have to do on their own. And it is probably the last thing I would DIY. Whereas the new way means understanding your body, knowing how to connect to your body, communicate with it, knowing your unique needs and the unique practices that can bring you back into alignment, where you can feel guided and supported and more empowered. This is where I invite you to consider joining me in the Brilliant Fertility Program. I'll just spend a couple minutes here before we do our tapping exercise. But this is a program that I developed through years of working with fertility patients and couples and realized that we have this huge gap in our medical system. And even with what I was able to offer to people one to one, there's only so many hours in a day. And I found myself repeating the same thing over and over again to the same couples that I was like, man, if I could get all of these people in the same room together, we could move so much faster. We could get so much more accomplished here. And that's why I believe, and I have experienced, that the group fertility system is so powerful. So this is a 4-month program. It has an online educational piece that's drip fed so that you can learn at your own pace. And then group coaching calls where you get access to me and whatever is individually coming up to you, to ask questions around, to get supported with, to look at your menstrual cycle charts, your labs, ask those hard questions of like, how the heck do I know how to tune into my intuition and be coached through that? I use as much evidence-based information as I can when it comes to the research on supplements and the microbiome, et cetera. And then my background with neurolinguistic programming, hypnosis, quantum time technique, emotional freedom technique. This is where you get that roadmap to accessing your intuition. So this is where that science meets soul. And we're getting kind of tight on time, so I'm going to skip the tour for now. I can send that over in an email later, but I want to make sure we get to our tapping. Really quickly, within the BFP, there are 12 live coaching calls. There's access to the online education portal, which is lifetime with the upgrades. So every few months, I add new information, new modules, new research. And I realized that it's helpful for people to have that for a lifetime, because we've got people who come back after they've had their first baby. They want to see, like, what's new? What do I need to do this time around? And lifetime access to the bonuses. We also have a members only area. So if someone needs a lifeline in between group calls, if they've got that appointment with their RE like that day and they're like, oh my gosh, what questions do I need to ask? Or this is what happened, I'm feeling so triggered around it. You don't have to sit with that on your own for days on end or weeks on end. You can access our group, have coaching from me within that WhatsApp. And this is incredibly valuable. So I could value this at $10,000, probably higher, because we've helped so many people avoid having to go through IVF altogether. This program is $29.97. And when you compare that to IUI, IVF, I know that it's hard with comparison, right? And I don't actually advise comparison when it comes to fertility in the most cases, but you're not getting the root cause medicine from these treatments with IUI and IVF. You're not getting the tools that support with emotional and mental and spiritual part of this journey. And while IVF can be extremely miraculous in what it can accomplish, it's also an incredibly stressful process. So we want to make sure that people are getting the foundations they need to have a more successful IVF process and have remarkably less stress as they go through that. But for you guys who are on this call, I have some really good bonuses for you. And for those of you watching the replay, when you enroll by the 14th, I will be knocking down this price by $497. And we've got some big bonuses. So number one, because men are so important, the fertility health for sperm carriers. So we basically want to get these sperm to be like Michael Phelps' sperm. And we have the bonus number two, rewriting your story. So this is the piece that helps people with the emotional processing of saying, like, here's where I am, here is where I want to be. How do I draw that line from here to there and see the emotions and process them and like move through it instead of suppressing? And this also brings to light all of the limiting beliefs that we then use emotional freedom technique to move through. So we have our bonus number 3, which is access to the entire vault of tapping and meditations. So over the last 5 years, I've recorded dozens of these tapping meditations, over 60 of them. And they're very specific to the things that come up on the fertility journey, which I find very unique. I haven't seen that elsewhere. We're going to tap today. So I'm going to go ahead and scroll to our 4th tool here. And let's see, should go ahead and get comfy, shake it out a little bit. Imagine that everything that's happened so far today, you could just set to the side, take a deep breath. I know you might already be thinking about, wait, how do I learn more about this brilliant fertility program? Don't worry, you have all the time in the world. But I want to help you process something that's coming up for you now. Whether that's Mother's Day, whether that's like pissed off that you keep getting dismissed at your doctor's office, whether it's running out of time. You can message this to me privately if you go to the chat and you just find my name, or you can share with the group, what is the biggest struggle that's coming up for you now that I can support you through today? And we're going to go through about a 5 to 10 minute tapping process to clear that away. And if you are watching the replay on this, like go ahead and pause me right now real quick. And I want you to just write that down for yourself. What is the predominant emotion, the predominant thought that you are having about your fertility? And then we rate it. So from 0 to 10, 0 being like, yeah, no, this doesn't bother me at all, to 10 being like, this is the most intensely I could imagine feeling around this. Yeah, not being a mom or not being pregnant yet for another Mother's Day. We might just do that today. Feeling like running out of time. Will I ever have a second baby? Will I ever have the family I desire? Yeah, thank you guys for sharing. I know it takes a lot to acknowledge the hard things too. Sometimes it feels like, oh, if I say it, it's going to be true. Asking the courage, getting the courage to ask help on this solo parenting journey, that's all valid. So we want to acknowledge those feelings that are coming up around it. So when you think about not being a mom or pregnant yet for another Mother's Day, when you think about running out of time, when you think about getting the courage to ask for help, what is the emotion? Is it fear, sadness, frustration? And rate that for yourself, 0 to 10. And we're going to go ahead and start tapping. I do have, again, a gazillion tapping recordings in the Brilliant Fertility Program. And I go through each one in terms of like what points we're tapping on. You really can't mess up tapping. Since I'm wearing a headset, I'm just going to be tapping on one side. You can tap on both sides if you want. But we always start with this outer part of the hand. This is called the anchoring point, and taking a few deep breaths. And this feeling that I have like I'm running out of time. And you guys, it's really normal to get emotional as you do these. You might find yourself crying, you might hiccup a lot, you might yawn, you might feel like you're going to burp or throw up, get a headache. It's all normal. It's all part of like resistance of wanting to acknowledge. It's part of shedding what's no longer serving us. It's like the ego kind of stepping in and being like, no, I don't want to change. So just reminding yourself your ego, your body, that all of this is for your highest good. This feeling that you have like you're running out of time, this sadness, this grief about not being pregnant for yet another Mother's Day, fear of asking for help, the fear of not finding an answer, a fear that there's something wrong or that your life might not look the way you had wanted it to. All of it is valid. Doesn't feel good. It is valid. And because you're here and you are ready to do things differently, and you are the type of person who's getting comfortable with growing and learning how to accept yourself, that you are ready for change. With the next points, you can go ahead and repeat after me if you're in a place to. Moving to the eyebrow. This sadness about not being pregnant yet. This having to face yet another Mother's Day without having my baby. This fear that I'm running out of time. This worry that I have whether or not I'll be able to have a baby. This question of, will I ever have the family I desire? Around the collarbone here, and take a big deep breath. It all hurts so much sometimes. This one, we're going under the underarm or like right at bra line. And I often don't know if I'm doing the right things to help this happen. And I often have a hard time trusting myself, trusting my body, trusting the universe's plan for me. Sometimes I wonder if I should just give up. And I feel sad and scared about that. And I feel like in some way I've failed. But somehow I made it here to this moment, to this tapping. And so there's this little part of me that trusts that I got here, and that I'm gathering the wisdom and the tools to move forward and do things differently. And that feels empowering. So even though I have these fears and this sadness and this grief, I'm learning to allow my trust to grow larger than my fears. And I am learning how to allow myself to trust my intuition. I'm learning how to find the resources to find my intuition. Even right here in this moment, as I tap, I'm feeling calmer. I can feel my breathing become easier. I can feel my entire state beginning to relax. And from this state, I believe I'll be able to find that little intuitive voice more easily, so that I can learn how to trust myself and trust my body. So that I can learn how to trust the timeline, release the timeline that I had put myself on, release the expectations of society, and take a big, deep breath. Every day in every way, I am learning how to trust myself. Every day in every way, I'm learning how to regulate my nervous system. Every day in every way, I am learning how to tune into my intuition, call my power back to me, to find courage in taking the right next step for myself. I am ready, open, and willing to trusting myself and believing that because I desire this, it is meant for me. And I'm ready and willing and open to shedding whatever is no longer serving me so that I can step into the identity of this person who receives what I desire. A couple big deep breaths there. Just take a moment to see how you're feeling. Let me know in the chat what's coming up for you. If that's your first time tapping, just sit with it for a minute. It's okay if you feel almost like a little disoriented. That's okay. That's actually you building new neural networks. Big shift on that very last statement. I'm so glad. Cool. Good. Well, that's a little taste of what we do in my work. Um, I often incorporate tapping into our group sessions as we see what's coming up for our members. I also do custom tapping recordings with my one-to-one patients. And, sometimes if someone's in the office with me and they're in a really activated state, then we'll just, within 5 minutes start to shift that so that they can receive their treatment more effectively too, whatever it is that we're prescribing that day. So again, like if working in this manner feels compatible, supportive, if you feel a pull towards it, then I invite you to book a discovery call. This is no obligation. This is just an opportunity to learn about what you've been through, discuss your unique needs, and see what the best path forward is. My motto with meeting with someone is that I will always leave them better off than I found them. So even if there's something that tells us like maybe we're not a good fit for each other, do I know someone who is? Do I know of another option that would be? So I invite you to book a call. I'll drop the link in the chat one more time and then I'll send it out in emails. But I want to thank you guys so much for being here today and setting aside this time for yourself and knowing that even if you do nothing else, just your state of being has shifted while doing this work and listening and absorbing. And that's powerful. So I hope you can celebrate yourself a bit today. I unfortunately got way too into it and didn't leave enough time for questions. So I invite you to email me with your questions, and I would love to help support you in any way I can. I hope you guys have an amazing weekend. And again, thank you so much for staying all the way towards the end. You guys are rock stars. Take care, guys. You're so welcome.